Hey all, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping. You may notice that my voice sounds a little off compared to normal. My family and I did catch COVID last week and over the weekend, and so I'm a little stuffy, a little plugged up, but I appreciate you bearing with me here as we give the intro to the episode. I just wanted to take some time here to talk about some exciting news. As of this episode going live, the new season is live in the game. Love and Thunder, a Thor-themed season for the game. We kind of knew this was coming because it was accidentally kind of the title for the season was flashing on the screen for many users over the last month, and so we were anticipating this coming. It also ties in nicely to the new Thor movie launching nationwide, or I should say worldwide, next week. But I just wanted to give a little highlight of what you get in the season pass. So you do unlock Thor. We talked about Thor in our episode where we kind of broke down leaked cards. But Thor is a 4-cost, 6-power card that reads, on reveal, shuffle Mjolnir into your deck. And so you can unlock Thor at level 1, and then at level 50 you unlock a special variant of Thor, which looks really cool. Along the way, you also unlock a couple of new player icons of different Thor characters like Lady Sif and Heimdall. You also unlock new variants of Lady Sif and Heimdall throughout the track. So a lot of cool things here. Make sure you go check it out. Exciting to kind of see this new pass, and I'm excited to see how people use Thor and if Thor sees a lot of play. So again, I appreciate you bearing with me on the poor sound and poor voice. My family and I are on the mend. Hopefully come next episode I'll be sounding a lot better, but appreciate you as always tuning in. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at can't_stop_snap for all things with the podcast. And without further ado, let's jump into today's episode.
Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping. Very excited to have you here today, and this is actually our first time having a returning guest on the show. We are once again joined by Cqrbon. Cqrbon joined us a few weeks ago for our very first episode, and he's the first one we're having back on for a second time. Cqrbon, thank you for being willing to join us for a second episode.
Hey, yeah, thank you for having me back, Michael. I had a good time last time, and I'm excited to talk about some more stuff in this episode.
Awesome. You know, one of the advantages of you going first and kind of being the first episode, anytime I kind of publicize a new episode of the podcast, it seems like some people go listen to the new episode, but a group of those people kind of looking at the first time, they go back to your first episode, right? So people kind of keep funneling back there. So getting lots of listens to that original episode. So, well, today we're going to be talking about a different topic than we've talked in the past episodes. In the past episodes, we've mostly been focusing on cards, breaking down the cards at different costs, etc. Today we're going to be talking locations. You know, we've alluded to locations throughout other episodes, as we've said this card plays well with this location, but this time we're going to really look at it from the locations aspect and think about what cards, what decks, what strategies, what tricks can you use with some of these locations to beat out your opponent, right? So we are going to dive here into the list. We're going to go in alphabetical order from A to Z and just kind of give our impressions of locations and the strategies that we've seen, that we've used, or we think would be useful to play depending on what your board looks like in any given game. With that being said, we are going to dive into the first one here, Atlantis. Atlantis is a newer location that's been added to the game. Atlantis reads as its ability, if you only have one card here, it has +5 power. Now, obviously, that's making you lean into wanting to play one high-powered card here or play something that gets boosted for being the only card there. But, from what I've seen, Cqrbon, sometimes, this appears on my board, and just depending on how the game's going, I feel like there's sometimes more of a benefit to playing other cards here, right? I don't want to lock up one location to one card, just depending on my deck. I don't know. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think Atlantis, you either have to commit to it or not. You kind of have to decide. You have to decide a little bit early. So Atlantis is pretty good for like big decks. Like I personally have been playing a lot of Wave Jubilee. So when I see this location, I'm very happy because I can slam down a big, like America Chavez, Infinite, Hulk, with like a big card there to take advantage of that buff, and usually win that location with just one card. But you kind of have to decide early whether you want to commit to it or not.
Yeah, for sure. Well, up next we have Avengers Compound. Avengers Compound reads, on turn 5, all cards must be played here. I think this, most decks can play around this location. There's certain locations that kind of lock you out certain turns or force you to play certain turns. This one, I usually just try to play it if I'm playing a deck where I'm trying to really fill up my board with minions, etc. I just try to focus. Once this is revealed, I try to focus. Okay, this makes me kind of stop and think, where am I really playing everything on the board, and where do I want to be on turn 5 when I'm either playing a 5-drop or I'm playing some smaller drops, multiple cards. How am I going to set myself up to have my ramp used most effectively?
Yeah, I think Avengers Compound is one of the most interesting locations, and there's so much counterplay is what I like in particular about this one. There are some, like, you can trigger your Guardians of the Galaxy cards to get bonus power at that location. You can you have a lot of information about what your opponent's going to be doing because they're also going to be playing there. So there's potential for you to play a counter card like Enchantress or Shang-Chi or stuff like that. So I really like Avengers Compound. It's very interesting, and it varies a lot how you use it from deck to deck.
Yeah, I personally have been using Shang-Chi in more of my decks, and I have used it on Avengers Compound, knowing kind of like, okay, they've already got a high card there. They may lay down another high card, etc., and it kind of plays to your advantage. So up next, we have Baxter Building. Baxter Building reads, whoever is winning this location gets +3 power at the others. I'm interested how you play around this one, because sometimes I feel like I've overcommitted to Baxter Building, and my opponent's taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think you got to be really, really careful with Baxter Building, because the +3 power is good, but you need to not overcommit to Baxter Building. Like, a lot of times I'll see people, dump their 4 cost, 5 cost, and 6 cost card there just to try and get that power, but then they end up losing the other 2 locations because they didn't put enough power there. So I think it's a tricky one. It's another one that I think is super, super interesting, because the potential for counterplay is really, really interesting with this one. So
yeah, I've been trying to lean more into either my Shang-Chi play there or something like a Carnage Nova kind of combo there. Make my opponent think I'm going to load it up so they'll commit, and then I do the opposite. So, well, up next is Central Park. Central Park reads, add a squirrel to each location. So this kind of, sometimes I'm excited about it, sometimes I'm not so much. Sometimes if I'm playing type deck, because it just kind of fills really 25% of your board when it flips over, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Central Park?
Yeah, Central Park is a little bit of an interesting one. It has the potential to mess up a lot of different decks with what it does. There's some cards that need an empty spot to be good. There's sometimes you need those board spaces for the kind of deck you're playing. Sometimes you hit Space Throne and nobody can play cards there because there's 2 squirrels fighting for it. So It's an interesting one. I think it favors decks that want to kind of flood the board. So like Nova, Carnage, Khazar, those kinds of decks. So
yep, agreed. Up next, we have one of my favorite locations, actually, is Cloning Vats. Description reads, when you play a card here, add a copy to your hand. Obviously, with only 12 cards in your deck, you can't have duplicates, right? Being able to get duplicates of certain cards in a match like this can be really fun. Sometimes I've put the wrong card down and I'm like, why did I get a duplicate of this? This is not a good idea. I'm not actually going to be able to play it, right? What cards do you focus on putting down here if Cloning Vats pops up?
Cloning Vats is one of the most interesting ones. Like some of the craziest games happen on Cloning Vats. So there's a lot of different cards. I find it's best if there's cards that can get an increase in power and keep that power buff, because if you clone it, it'll keep the buff and come back to your hand. Like Carnage is a really big one. they can get really big on cloning bats and come back to your hand with the buff version. You can play them another location. Cards like that are like a bit cheaper because you don't really want to be cloning 4 costs, so you're not spending too much energy. But being able to clone, those really powerful like dinosaur, 2 or 3 drops is really, really powerful this location.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of games where we end up, between me and my opponent, there's 3, 4, 5 dinosaurs on the board by the end of the game, right, with cloning bats. So up next we have Crimson Cosmos. The description reads 1, 2, and 3 cost cards can't be played here. I tend to play decks with a lot of 1, 2, 3 cost cards. Whenever this shows up in my game, I end up feeling sad with some of the decks I play, like Chavez, some of the most played, decks where you're trying to get a lot of small, low cost cards out on the board. This really can lock you down.
Yeah, this one's an interesting one because especially for these hyper like low curve decks that we've been seeing, we see Nova Carnage, we see Dinosaur, we see Collector. They can't put any of those big cards that they normally would put in that location. So not only does it really shut those decks down, but it also gives you a lot of information because that there are a bunch of cards, roughly half the cards in the game that they physically cannot play there. So you have a lot of information about what your opponent is going to put there. So if you know generally what their deck is, you know exactly what cards they can play there. So that the information part of it is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely kind of changes the way you think about the game and think about what your opponent's going to do. Well, up next is Danger Room. Danger Room has lost me a game today. Danger Room reads, cards played here have a 25% chance to be destroyed. I do my math. I say, well, if it doesn't get destroyed, if none of my cards get destroyed, I'll probably win. But then that one card, gets destroyed and I lose 4 cubes or 8 cubes. What are your thoughts on Danger Room?
Danger Room is an interesting one. This is one of the ones that it's the hardest to manage in terms of the randomness, because it just you just never know when it could screw you or your opponent. So obviously there's stuff you can play to make it like armor that you can play there to make it safe for everybody to play cards in there. I think Danger Room actually favors probably like move decks that can just get cards into there without needing to actually play cards, or cards that can summon other cards to that location like Jubilee, because the summon cards can't get destroyed then. So that's an interesting way to put power into the Danger Room while minimizing the risk that you lose your cards.
Yeah, great distinction. It is played there, not a generate or move. So good distinction. Up next, we have Dark Dimension. Dark Dimension reads, cards played here are not revealed until the game ends. So very interesting. I mean, 3 locations in a game, 4 slots at each location. And generally, when this isn't on the board, you really kind of know what's going on each turn, and you can kind of see the picture. But this can leave, a lot of mystery till the end of the game.
Yeah, Dark Dimension is a super, super interesting one, mainly because my favorite part about it is that the on-reveal effects won't trigger till the end of the game. So there's some very interesting things you can do with this. So for example, in a discard deck, if you can basically play discard cards here for free, and they won't try to discard a card until the end of the game. So you can sneak a lot of power into there. Another interesting one is cards like Ebony Maw, which normally when Ebony Maw is active, you can't play cards at that location. But under Dark Dimension, it's basically just a 1 power 1 energy 6 power card, and it's just free power then. So there's a lot of super interesting things you can do with Dark Dimension.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of the Ebony Maw benefit there. Up next, we have District X. District X reads, replace both decks with 10 random cards. I don't know if this has happened to you, and it's obviously just, I'm imagining it's happening consistently, but I feel like every time I want to try out a new deck, the first time I try it out, District X shows up, like the first location flipped over. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this new deck I built. Super excited. And then it's like, well, nope, that's out the door. 10 new random cards.
Yeah, this one's pretty funny. There's not a whole lot to say with this one. I will say a really funny game I watched someone else play on stream today. There was a Limbo was up as one of the locations, and they had one location empty, and they pulled from District X, they pulled a Galactus on turn 6, and the opponent thought that there was going to be a 7th turn, so they passed to play Infinite, and so he played Galactus on turn 6 and destroyed the Limbo, and the game ended right there with only Galactus on the board. It was pretty funny. So it can lead to some fun shenanigans. Obviously, it's basically completely random, but yeah, it can be fun, but it can screw you at the same time.
Yeah, fun to experiment with cards you don't have yet, for sure. Up next, we have Dream Dimension. Dream Dimension reads, on turn 5, cards cost 1 more. This is another one where when I see it, I just try to plan. Again, I've already stated, a lot of my decks I play with a lot of low-cost cards, just what I've been playing thus far. And usually, if I plan right, I can still get, a card down I want, or even 2 cards down I want. And I try to just plan around this when I see it.
Yeah, Dream Dimension is a challenging one because especially for decks that are wanting to play a 5-cost card on turn 5, this is absolutely brutal to run into this. So it is challenge. You do have to kind of plan around it. As soon as you see it, you have to kind of figure out your turn beforehand. So maybe you play a 4-drop, maybe you play a couple cheaper cards instead. So it is awkward to plan around, but it's awkward for your opponent too. So
yeah, for sure. Up next, we have Ego. Ego is the location version, essentially, of Agatha Harkness. A little bit different, but the location Ego takes over and plays your cards for you. This is a pretty rare location. I think it's kind of a lower drop rate. I've only ever seen it in a couple of my games. But essentially, it's just an AI that takes over. But my understanding, you tell me if you understand differently, it's just random, basically. It kind of plays randomly for both players. There's no real strategy to it.
Yeah, Ego is pretty random as far as I can tell. I mean, the AI just basically takes over and does some interesting things sometimes. I will say that I think I've hit Ego 5 or 6 times, and I don't think he's lost me a game yet. I think I have 100% win rate with Ego so far. So I'll keep hitting him in my games and keep get those free wins from Ego.
Yeah. I'm sad to say out of the 2 times I think I've lost both. So I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum. Up next, we have Elysium. I really enjoy this one as well. Love it when it shows up in my games. Elysium reads, cards cost 1 less. So I don't know. I have a lot of fun with this game, or when this pops up in my game. Again, when you're playing something like a Kazar Chavez deck where you're trying to fill the deck or fill the board with 1-cost cards and trying to buff them with Blue Marvel, Kazar, etc., you can just really fill up the board easily when this is in your game.
Yeah, this location is absolutely crazy, and combined with some of the other locations, it can make for some of the craziest games. I will say that it's very good for both board flood decks and decks that like to play bigger cost cards because they can play more of those big cost cards and earlier in the games too, which is pretty impactful. So it's all around just a benefit for both sides, and yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It benefits your opponent generally as much as it benefits you. Up next, we have Grand Central. Grand Central reads, at the end of turn 5, put a card from each player's hand here. What's your strategy when you see Grand Central on the board?
So Grand Central, I've been playing, like I said, a lot of Wave Jubilee. That's my main deck to climb with. So when I see Grand Central, I like to try and dump as many of my low cost cards out of my hand as possible to pull a big free card out of my hand. I mean, nothing really beats the feeling of pulling a 20 power card out of your hand for free. So
yeah. Oh, I mean, you can't beat that. I totally get that. Yeah, the strategy is, okay, on turn 5, you're going to pull something. So you want to minimize the low-cost cards that it could potentially pull out of your hand.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Up next is Holla. I feel like this is another one where I often overcommit. Holla reads, at the end of turn 4, destroy all cards controlled by the player losing here. Maybe I'm a noob, and I fall into that trap. When I see this, I say, well, they've got 1 or 2 things down there. I really want to commit. I want to win this location so that they lose. And, that can really turn the tide of a game. But I feel like it really ends up being 50-50, whether it's me or my opponent.
Yeah, Holla is a super interesting one. I love the locations that make you think about what you're going to do, plan ahead, and let you analyze what you think your opponent is going to do and play around it. So Holla, of course, can swing the game if you are the one to destroy your opponent's cards in one way or another if you play around with it correctly. So there's a lot of different strategy. You can wait and put like a big dinosaur on it right on turn 4, and so it surprises them and breaks their card. There's a lot of strategy and nuance to it. So I really like Holla.
Yeah. Well, up next we have Hellfire Club. Hellfire Club, the description reads, 1-cost cards can't be played here. Yeah, I'm pretty straightforward. This can kind of slow down certain decks. It locks can lock people out of a Nova Carnage kind of combo, right? If you're not able to play your Nova down here. Sometimes, maybe you're planning to buff the other locations, etc. That's happened to me more than once. What are your thoughts on Hellfire Club?
Hellfire Club is very similar to Crimson Cosmos in that it prevents some of these plays, like you said, like it prevents you from playing cards like Nova and whatnot at this location, but it also gives you a lot of information about what your opponent is doing as well, because that they can't play the 1-cost cards there as well. So if you know that they can't Nova combo there, maybe you play your armor to stop their combo at a different location. So that kind of stuff is pretty important. So
Yeah, definitely can kind of help you kind of play that lockout strategy. Up next, we have Kiln. That's how I'm going to say. I don't know if that's exactly how you'd pronounce it, but the description reads, when a card moves here, give it +2 power. Now, obviously, there are some move decks people are playing. So, that plays into this location great. So, something that a lot of people just include in lots of decks is Nightcrawler. And I see Nightcrawler pretty consistently. When this location pops up, you put it in one location, you pop it over, and it's all of a sudden a 1/4.
Yeah, this location is super interesting. I think it's Kunlun, I'm pretty sure. I think it's obviously it only really synergizes with cards that can move. So when you're playing a movement deck, you're super happy to see Kunlun. It's a great power buff to your deck. There's also some interesting synergy with some locations that move other cards too, so you can play around that if you see both of those locations in a game.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Up next, we have Comartage. Comartage, I believe, was one of the early featured locations in the game. And kind of at the beginning of the game, when you're kind of doing the tutorial and playing through the game, you're kind of led into building an on-reveal deck. So Comartage's ability reads, on-reveal effects happen twice at this location. So the dream here is you get all of your on-reveal, good cards here, Ironheart, whatever, and then you play Odin on turn 6, right? And then you get to basically get all of your on-reveal abilities again a second time, and just super powerful if you can line it up right.
Yeah, Comartage is a very interesting one because a lot of decks, regardless of the archetype, you usually run some on-reveal cards. So you can make use of this even if you're not playing an Odin deck specifically. So there's a lot of different cards that it works with, and usually both players are happy to see it.
Yeah, 100%. Up next, we have Klintar. Klintar is part of there's 3 main locations right now that kind of minus power on cards. Klintar is cards here have -2 power. There's also one that we'll talk about later that's -1, and another one that's -3. Usually I kind of take this 2 ways. Either this is my, hey, cards or kind of have a throwaway location. This is it. Kind of play into that. Or I say, this is where all my big cards are going to go that can withstand this debuff.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I also think these kind of minus power locations encourage you to play fewer cards at this location, because the more cards you play at this location, the more power you're losing overall, because you're getting that additional debuff then. So Klintar is also a great spot for like big decks to play a big card there to win that location.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. If you're maxing out your board, you really are getting that -8 versus a -2 if you play one big card there. So, well, up next is Nowhere. Nowhere reads, when you play a card here, destroy it. So obviously beneficial to some, Nova, everybody's favorite or least favorite card. This plays into there. This can trigger that for you. but also, sometimes this doesn't get flipped over till the third location. So sometimes you're able to lock in some cards there early, kind of by random, right? I guess if you have a Watu and the locations beforehand, you can kind of play into that strategy. But yeah, there's a couple things here.
Yeah, I think Nowhere is a super interesting one because there's a lot of different cards that allow you to get into Nowhere in different ways. So there's cards that add power from to the side, like Claw and Mr. Fantastic. There's movement cards. There's cards like Jubilee also works. I've won mini games by playing a Jubilee on turn 6 into Nowhere, and then it pulls a big card out of my deck, and then that card does not get destroyed then. So there's a lot of interesting ways to put power into there, and it's a pretty interesting location.
Yeah, for sure. Up next we have Kiln. Kiln is it reads, you can't play cards here after turn 4. What do you do when you see Kiln? Do you try to max it out or let your opponent do that and focus on the other 2 locations?
I think Kiln is another one of those super interesting ones where there's a lot of counterplay. Because even after Kiln locks down, you can still move cards and add power from other locations. If you have cards that do that, so playing the right cards into Kiln, countering your opponent's cards that are in the Kiln but on turn 4 before it gets locked down, moving cards or adding extra power to your cards that are in there to win it later on. There's just a lot of different plays you can make with Kiln. So I really like Kiln as a location.
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely kind of won Kiln after, by getting a card that can kind of continue to buff itself, whether that's Sunspot or Bishop or something like that, right? Where you can kind of continue to buff it after the location's closed out. Well, up next we have Lechugia, I think is how you pronounce it, at least if you were speaking Spanish. And it reads, when you play a card here, shuffle 3 rocks into your deck. What are your thoughts here?
This is an interesting one because I think a lot of players, especially I see newer players, really don't like to play cards here because they don't want to put the rocks in the deck. And I think that's partially correct. I think you have to contest this location generally. And if you can contest it more than your opponent, then it's good. So I think a lot of times you want to wait till like turn 3 or 4, but then you need to start playing cards here and just put the rocks into the deck. I will say that a very interesting interaction is that if you have Jubilee in your deck and you want to play Jubilee here, she needs to be the first card that you play here because she will pull the card out of your deck first before the rocks go in, because I've had her, I've misplayed before and had her pull a rock out of my deck, which was not very fun. So
yeah, definitely a bummer when that can happen. I'd be interested. I don't think we have a card now, but I'd be interested if sometime down the road there's a card that interacts with how many cards are left in your deck. That would be interesting with this location.
Oh yeah.
Up next we have Limbo. Limbo is a really fun one. I enjoy having Limbo in my games. Limbo reads, there is a turn 7 this game, right? I think with the games being so short, which I enjoy, I love, but just adding that 7th turn, 7 energy on that turn really just opens up a lot of more ramp and things that can happen for both players, and it usually is kind of a fun finish whether you win or lose.
Yeah, having Limbo, having a 7th turn is absolutely crazy. It can really push some decks over the top if they're able to get combos that they never would have been able to previously. I will say that Limbo does favor decks that go tall rather than wide. Swarm decks are trying to fill up the board by turn 6, and so they generally don't have a lot of space to work with, whereas big decks are able to put multiple big threats down on each location. And there's a super interesting interaction with Limbo where if you change it to a different location on turn 6, the game will end on turn 6. So I've had a couple of games where my opponent thinks that there's going to be a turn 7, but I can play like Scarlet Witch or something and prevent the turn 7 from even happening, so you can win games that way.
Yes, that exact scenario. I've done that myself and I've seen it happen, and it's very interesting, that interaction. Up next, we have Los Diablos base. The description reads, at the end of turn 3, ruin a random location. This is another one of those that we've kind of said really makes me think and try to plan ahead. When I see it, I try to really just take a second and say, how do I want to play this game? Because I'm not guaranteed to be able to really play into the strategy of one of the locations that's currently on the board, right? And so obviously if this flips on turn 3, well, then you know that's a little harder to go off of. But if it flips to turn 1, especially, I really try to say, okay, I'm going to be watching over the next couple turns. I'm really going to try to play carefully here.
Yeah, this is a super interesting one. Exactly like you said, you have to kind of think ahead and strategize a little bit. It's going to be a 50-50 for which other location it hits. So um, there's a lot of potential for it to swing the game one way or another. So depending on it, it could ruin something that's good for you. It could ruin something that's good for your opponent. So, but you just do your best to plan around it and adapt.
Yep, exactly. Up next, we have Mindscape. This wins the award for the location that I forget that it's on the board most times. It says, at the start of turn 6, swap hands. I don't know how, but my mind apparently goes blank every time this is on the board because I'll see it flip. I'll say, okay, I need to think about that. And then it's turn 4 and 5, and I forget. And then turn 6 rolls around, and I completely have not played into planning for this to happen. And I end up retreating from most of those games because I end up leaving my opponent with like a Nova Carnage or something in hand that I know, well, they're going to snap here and I am done for.
Yeah, I have to say, if I have to pick a location that I like the least, overall, I really love the location system in this game, but Mindscape is not my favorite at all. The number of times that this is just I flipped and I've been, oh no, this is so bad is crazy. So I will say that there's I've seen some interesting decks going around that run a lot of discard cards. Like there's Dracula discards at the end of your turn and there's like strong guy. So the idea to play around Mindscape in those decks is to discard like almost your entire hand by turn 5. So you literally give your opponent no cards to work with, which is very interesting. So for those decks it's good, but for almost every other deck in the game it's pretty bad.
Yes, agreed. Up next, we have Miniaturized Lab. This reads, on turns 3, 4, and 5, no cards can be added here. Now, again, this maybe is just my superstition, but I swear this is always my third location flipped. So it flips, and then it's already turn 3, and you can't play it on until turn 6. But, I mean, that doesn't happen every time. But definitely, I mean, it locks you out of just half the game being able to play here.
Yeah, Miniaturized Lab is super interesting. I really love. This is another one of those ones where you have to strategize a lot to think about what's happening. Especially it depends on what turn it flips. There's a lot of different strategies that go into it. And the interesting thing is that the text reads cards cannot be added here, so you're not able to move cards or summon cards into this location, which adds another level of how am I going to win this? How do I need to play stuff here early? Do I need to play stuff here on turn 6? It's super interesting location.
Yes, agreed. Up next, we have Mirror Dimension. Mirror Dimension reads, at the end of turn 3, transform into one of the other locations. Talk about a location that makes you think once you see this one, right? Obviously, at that point, it's a 50-50, right? Fairly, good odds, if you will. It's nothing less than a flipping of a coin. You're going to get a second location of one of the other ones. So, yeah, I mean, I try to plan my strategy. Okay, ideally it's going to be this location. I'll try to play into that, and definitely some crazy things have happened when I've guessed right.
Yeah, Mirror Dimension is similar to Los Diablos base, except instead of rooting a location, it copies it, which is super interesting. So Mirror Dimension can lead to some absolutely crazy games. I've had multiple games where it's copied Elysium, so everyone's cards cost 2 less, and you're able to just play your whole hand regardless of what deck you're playing. It's pretty crazy. So it's a super interesting one, and it varies a lot based on what other locations come up, but there's a lot of strategy, a lot of trying to manage probability as best you can in order to win with Mirror Dimension.
Yeah. Up next, we have Mojo World. Mojo World reads, whoever has more cards here gets 100 power. I'm still surprised by this. This was a featured location. The ultimate counter move here, in my mind, not always, right, but is playing Electra, like on turn 6 here, right? If your opponent has at least one cost card there, basically you're guaranteed, you can kind of force yourself to end up with 4 cards and then have 3 at the end, and you just kind of guarantee the win at this location.
Yeah, this is another one with a lot of very interesting counterplay. So if everyone has 4 cards here, this is just a normal location. But as soon as someone does not have 4 cards here, it becomes this fight of, is he going to put more cards there? Do I need to put more cards there? Is he going to electrify 1-drop? So people have started only playing 2-drops onto this location. So I will say that I really love the not the aesthetic, the like how the cards match the different locations. So there's the card Mojo. If both players have 4 cards at this location, gets +6 power. So I just love that there's that kind of neat interaction between Mojo World and Mojo the card.
Yeah, definitely some flavor kind of going on between both the cards and the locations, and I do like when that kind of has a theme. It's nice. Up next, we have Monster Metropolis. Description reads, the cards, plural, with the highest power here get +3 power. How would you play into this location?
Monster Metropolis is super, super interesting because on the surface, you want to be playing, the highest power card here to get that buff, and so you're beating your opponent more easily then. So it makes sense to play cards that go up in power quite a bit. So like things like Dinosaur or, Chavez, big cards. But there's also a super interesting interaction if there's a tie for the highest power. So if you have the highest power on 2 different cards here, they both get the +3 buff. And so that has actually won me a couple games, is using that interaction to squeeze out extra power at that location.
Yes, I've laid down a couple Sentinels or something. And if my opponent hasn't played there yet, then all of a sudden that +3 is multiplied by the cards you have there that are tied. So up next, we have Muir Island, which is a new location, I believe within the last week. The description reads, after each turn, give cards here +1 power. I've had a lot of fun with this location. The advice in the game, right, that's about this featured location says play cards here early, right? And you can kind of have cards that you play turn 1, 2, or 3 kind of get this +1 over the course of each turn of the game. Really fun. Obviously, you want to have 4 cards here as early as you can most times, because then you're getting +4 power every turn. So I try to do that. I have also used this to my advantage, kind of watching my opponent really, stack up like a collector here. Then it's also getting the + power, and then I throw down a Shang-Chi, at the end of the game and get rid of them. So.
Yeah, there's a ton of interesting interactions and counterplay with this. Like you mentioned, Shang-Chi is absolutely crazy. I've seen Shang-Chi kill 2 or 3 cards on the opponent's side with this location. I think it's tempting to play 4 cards into here early as possible, but if you're running a deck with Iron Man, you actually want to put Iron Man here on turn 5 if possible, because that +4 that your cards are getting becomes +8 for 2 turns. So you get an 8 power differential over your opponent in 2 turns if you're able to get Iron Man down here.
Yeah, that is a great point. Maybe don't want to lock it out too early. Up next, we have Murder World, a very cheery place. The description reads, at the end of turn 3, destroy all cards here. Definitely kind of gives you more information about how your opponent may play, right? If this is revealed early, you're going to obviously probably neither of you are going to play there. But though sometimes this is your 3rd location flipped, and both you and your opponent have units there, and too bad, so sad, they get wiped out on turn 3.
Yeah, Murder World is very interesting because you can definitely get punished for playing there if before it flips. There is some interesting synergy with cards that can't be destroyed or have an effect when they be destroyed. So if you're looking to destroy a card early, then Murder World might be a place where you actually want to play some cards early. And then later on, after turn 3, people start to flood it and recontest it. So there's a little bit of strategy. But I have had multiple times where I played a card on the right and turn 3 flips over and it's Murder World and I lose my 1-drop.
Yep. It has happened in many a game.
Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, produced, recorded, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.